There is a particular kind of weariness that only the faithful know, not the exhaustion of someone who has given up. That weariness has its own strange relief, the hollow quiet of a person who has finally stopped fighting. The weariness I am describing belongs to someone who has not stopped, someone who has been offered the table the world sets and refused it, someone who has watched people around them bend, accommodate, negotiate, and chosen not to, and who now carries, somewhere beneath the surface of ordinary days, a hunger that has no clean name and no obvious answer. You have endured. And endurance, in the 21st century, costs more than most sermons acknowledge. Perhaps it was the pressure to reframe your convictions so they would be more palatable at the table where everyone else sits. Perhaps it was the slow erosion campaign against your identity, the suggestion, repeated in 1,000 subtle forms, that who you are in Christ is too narrow, too antiquated, too inconvenient for the world as it currently presents itself. Perhaps it is simply the spiritual exhaustion of remaining anchored when the current is relentless, of praying over things that have not yet shifted, of holding to a promise that has not yet arrived in any form you can touch. This video is for you, not for the person who is coasting, not for the believer in the middle of a comfortable season, for the one who has endured. Because buried in the last book of Scripture, in a letter written to a church that was under a pressure most of us cannot fully imagine, there is a promise of extraordinary depth, a promise that most commentaries read past in 2 sentences, a promise so layered, so ancient, so personally calibrated to the one who receives it, that when you begin to excavate what it actually contains, it reshapes everything about how you understand what your endurance has been building toward. The book of Revelation, chapter 2, verse 17, the words of Christ himself, spoken to the church at Pergamum. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. 3 objects, 3 promises, layered inside a single verse. Hidden manna, a white stone, a new name no one else will ever know. Each of these objects, when examined against the original Greek text, against the ancient world in which this letter was written, against the deep typological roots embedded in the Hebrew scriptures, each one opens into a dimension of God's promise to the overcomer that the surface reading entirely misses. What does hidden mean in this context? Hidden from whom? Hidden where? The word Christ uses is not incidental. It is a precise theological term loaded with centuries of eschatological expectation in Jewish thought. A term the original audience of this letter would have recognized immediately as pointing to something specific, something ancient, something that had been stored, sealed, preserved, waiting. What is the white stone? Scholars have proposed at least 4 distinct interpretations, each rooted in a real practice of the ancient world. And when you place them side by side and examine which one aligns with the literary and theological structure of this passage, one interpretation rises above the rest, and what it reveals about how God sees the overcomer is unlike anything most believers have ever been told. And the new name, known only to the one who receives it, not known to angels, not known to other believers, not recorded anywhere in heaven's archives that any other being can access. A name that exists in the exclusive space between God and the one he has kept. Pause and consider what that means. In a world where identity is contested, negotiated, assigned by others, stripped away by shame, rewritten by circumstance, God promises a name that no external force can reach, a name that belongs to you and to him and to no one else in the universe. We are going to uncover all of it. Every layer, every dimension of this ancient promise, from the golden jar sealed inside the Ark of the Covenant, to the eschatological expectation of the Jewish rabbis, to the precise Greek vocabulary Christ chose in this verse. And when we reach the deepest layer, the revelation most teachers of this passage have never fully traced, everything about the promise will look different. What God has stored for the one who endures is not a reward invented after the fact. It is something that has existed since before the wilderness, preserved and untouched across centuries of human history, waiting for exactly this recipient. And when we uncover what this hidden manna actually is, the hunger you have been carrying will find a name at last. If this is already landing somewhere real in you, hit subscribe right now and give this video a like. Someone in your life has been enduring without language for it. Share this with them. Because what unfolds in the depths of this one verse was written specifically for people like us. To understand why the promise of hidden manna was given, you have to understand to whom it was given. And to understand that, you have to stand in Pergamum. Not the Pergamum of the imagination, not a vague ancient city somewhere in the past. The actual city, because when you feel the weight of what these believers were living under, the promise of Revelation 2:17 stops being a theological decoration and becomes something else entirely, a lifeline extended across centuries to people in conditions that were, in every human sense, desperate. Pergamum in the 1st century was one of the most significant cities in the Roman world, not merely a provincial town, a seat of imperial power. The capital of the Roman province of Asia for nearly 200 years before Ephesus eventually assumed that role, and it was a city of extraordinary religious density, layered, almost geological, with temples and cults and altars stacked upon one another across its famous Acropolis. The Acropolis of Pergamum rose over 1,000 feet above the surrounding plain, and at its summit, dominating the skyline for miles in every direction, stood the altar of Zeus, one of the largest and most elaborate religious monuments in the ancient world. A massive structure of white marble, approximately 36 meters wide and 33 meters deep. Its frieze depicting the battle between gods and giants in extraordinary sculptural detail. When Christ speaks of the place where Satan's throne is, most scholars locate this reference precisely here, at this altar, this monument to the imperial cult and to the god of the Greek pantheon, who stood at its center. Some scholars argue that the throne reference points instead to the Temple of Augustus, the first temple in the Roman Empire built specifically for the worship of a living emperor, located here in Pergamum. A fact that would have been deeply significant to the original recipients of this letter, who lived under the constant pressure of imperial cult participation. Others propose that Satan's throne was a more general reference to the accumulated density of pagan religious life in the city, its concentration of altars and temples being unparalleled in the region. But when we examine the evidence, what becomes clear is that the specificity of the phrase matters less than what it establishes about the conditions these believers navigated daily. Pergamum was not a neutral environment. To live as a follower of Christ in this city was not to live in a pocket of religious tolerance surrounded by polite indifference. It was to maintain a counter-identity inside a system that demanded participation. The imperial cult was not merely religious in the modern sense, the private compartment where beliefs are held quietly and cause no social friction. In the ancient world, religious participation was civic participation. The festivals, the public meals, where meat was offered to the gods, the oath-taking before imperial statues, these were woven into the fabric of commercial, social, and civic life. A craftsman who refused to participate in the guild ceremonies that honored the patron deity of his trade risked professional ruin. A citizen who declined to honor the emperor risked something worse. Christ's letter acknowledges the pressure directly. I know where you live, where Satan's throne is, yet you remain true to my name. These people had not cracked, and at least one of them, a man named Antipas, had been killed for it. Christ calls him my faithful witness, the same Greek word, martes, from which we derive the English word martyr. In Pergamum, faithfulness had already cost someone their life. And yet, and this is what makes the pastoral architecture of this letter so precise, not everyone in Pergamum was holding. Some within the congregation had begun following what Christ calls the teaching of Balaam. The reference is to the ancient story of Numbers 22 through 25, where Balaam, unable to curse Israel directly, instead advised the Moabites to seduce Israel through their women and their table, to draw the covenant people into eating food sacrificed to idols and into sexual immorality. The strategy was not military, it was relational, seductive. It worked not through external force, but through internal compromise. Consider the implications. The enemy who could not destroy Pergamum's believers through persecution was now attempting to absorb them through accommodation. The same pattern repeats across centuries with remarkable consistency. When outright opposition fails, the strategy shifts to assimilation. When you cannot be broken from the outside, the pressure moves to the inside. And the specific target is always the table. What you eat, what you consume, what you allow to nourish you. This is why the hidden manna is the answer to Pergamum's specific crisis. Not a general reward, a precisely calibrated response to a precisely calibrated temptation. The world had set its table and was offering its food. Christ's answer to the one who refuses, "I have a table of my own, and what is on it has been kept for you longer than you know." The promise of hidden manna cannot be understood apart from what the hidden manna actually is. And to discover that, we have to travel back to a golden jar that was sealed inside the Ark of the Covenant, containing something that was never meant to be eaten. Exodus 16. The Israelites have been in the wilderness for a month and a half, and they are hungry. Not the discomfort of a skipped meal, the raw, elemental hunger of a people who have walked away from the only food supply they knew and now stand in a desert with nothing. And God answers, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you," he tells Moses. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. What descends on the ground each morning is unlike anything anyone had ever seen or eaten. The text says it appeared like thin flakes, white, and it tasted like wafers made with honey. The Israelites looked at it and asked one another, "Manhu," the Hebrew phrase meaning, "What is this?" And the name attached itself to the substance, manna. What is this? This is what God sends. Now notice the structure of the provision with precision, because the architecture of how the manna worked is as important as the manna itself. It fell fresh every morning. Every single morning for 40 years, with one exception. The day before the Sabbath, a double portion fell so the people would not need to gather on the holy day. The provision was calibrated to the day, and there was a law embedded in its design. You cannot keep it. Whoever attempted to store manna overnight, to gather more than they needed for that day, to hold something in reserve against tomorrow, found the next morning that the excess had rotted. Bread worms became inedible. The manna that sustained the wilderness generation was designed to be consumed and renewed, consumed and renewed. It could not be preserved. That is the baseline. Now hear what follows. Exodus 16:32 through 34. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt." So Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it. Then place it before the Lord to be kept for the generations to come." As the Lord commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the testimony, the ark, where it was to be kept. A single jar, gold, as the writer of Hebrews confirms in chapter 9, verse 4, a golden jar. 1 omer of manna, approximately 2 liters, sealed inside, placed before the Ark of the Covenant, in the holiest space in Israel's sacred architecture. And unlike every other portion of manna that existed in the wilderness, this jar did not decay. Sit with this mystery for a moment. The same substance that rotted overnight when any Israelite tried to hold it sat in that golden jar for centuries without corruption. The Hebrews writer writing in the 1st century references it as still existing, the golden jar containing the manna, present tense, inside the ark. The same manna placed there in the wilderness of Sinai remained intact through Israel's entry into Canaan, through the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, through generations of kings and priests, sealed, untouched, preserved by a power that operated entirely outside the natural properties of the substance itself. And here is the question no one thinks to ask. Why? What was it for? Because the answer to that question is not administrative. It was not stored so that future Israelites could analyze it, or taste it, or scientifically verify that God had once provided in the desert. The text says explicitly, it was kept as a testimony, a witness, a preserved sign of what God was capable of. Ancient Jewish scholars noticed a pattern that runs from this moment forward through their entire eschatological tradition. The Midrash, the Talmudic writings, the apocryphal text of 2nd Baruch, all of them return to a single expectation. The manna sealed in the ark would be revealed again in the Messianic age. 2nd Baruch 29:8 says this directly. And it shall come to pass at that time that the treasury of manna shall again descend from on high, and they will eat of it in those years, because these are they who have come to the consummation of time. The treasury of manna, descending again. For those who have come to the consummation of time, the Sibylline oracles carry the same thread. Rabbinic tradition preserves it with variations, but the core expectation is consistent. The manna is not a closed chapter, it is a sealed chapter, waiting to be opened at the appointed time for the appointed people. This isn't merely historical, it's prophetic. When Christ stands before the church at Pergamum and promises hidden manna to the overcomer, he is not reaching for an obscure metaphor. He is speaking directly into a tradition his original audience understood immediately. He is telling them, what has been sealed since the wilderness, what has waited across centuries in that golden jar, is your inheritance. The bread that was stored for the end of time is stored for you. But there is a second object in this promise, a white stone with a name written on it that no one knows except the one who receives it. And the interpretations scholars have proposed for this white stone reveal dimensions of God's personal promise to the overcomer that most believers have never considered. The Greek is 2 words, Pisiphos Luke, white stone. In the entire New Testament, this phrase appears exactly once, here in Revelation 2:17, and because it appears only once, with no parallel passage to anchor its meaning against, scholars have returned to the ancient world to reconstruct what a first-century audience in Asia Minor would have understood when they heard it. What emerges from that reconstruction is not a single answer but a constellation of possibilities, each one rooted in a genuine practice of the ancient Mediterranean world. And when you examine them side by side, one alignment reveals itself with particular force. The first interpretation is the most immediately dramatic. In the Greek legal system, when a jury deliberated on a case, each juror cast a vote using a stone. A black stone meant condemnation. A white stone meant acquittal. To receive a white stone was to be publicly declared innocent, free from accusation, released from the sentence that had been threatened. Some scholars argue that Christ's promise of a white stone is precisely this, the final acquittal of the overcomer, the eternal declaration of innocence over a life that the accuser, the one whose title in Revelation 12:10 is the accuser of our brothers, has prosecuted relentlessly. Others propose a second reading rooted in Roman social custom. The tessera hospitalis was an ancient token of friendship and hospitality, typically a piece of wood or stone, broken in two between host and guest. Each person kept one half. If you or your descendants ever arrived at a stranger's home carrying your half of the tessera, the matching piece guaranteed you welcome, food, shelter, and the full extension of friendship, regardless of how much time had passed. On this reading, Christ's white stone is a token of eternal hospitality, a guarantee of access and welcome that can never expire, presented by the host of the heavenly table to the guest who endured the wilderness. A third interpretation draws from the world of Roman gladiatorial combat. When a gladiator had served his full term in the arena and was officially released from service, he received a wooden sword called the rudis, as a symbol of his discharge. The gladiatorial system also involved other tokens of release, small objects given to athletes or entertainers upon their retirement from a life of performance and danger. On this reading, the white stone represents freedom from the arena. The overcomer has survived the contest. The stone is Christ's certificate of discharge. You have fought. You have endured. You are free. The fourth interpretation reaches into Hebrew sacred tradition and may carry the deepest typological resonance. The breastplate of the Israelite high priest was set with 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. Each stone bore a name, engraved into it, carried into the Holy of Holies before God on the Day of Atonement. The imagery of a name inscribed on a stone and presented before God as an act of priestly intercession runs throughout the Hebrew priestly literature. Some commentators have proposed that Christ's white stone is a priestly stone, the overcomer's name carried on a stone before God, presented in the heavenly sanctuary by the great high priest himself. But when we examine the evidence carefully, placing each interpretation against the specific language of Revelation 2:17 and the literary context of the 7 letters as a whole, a convergent picture begins to form. The letters to the 7 churches in Revelation chapters 2 and 3 follow a consistent pattern. The promise given to the overcomer always stands in direct contrast to the specific threat or temptation facing that church. Pergamum's crisis was the pressure to eat food sacrificed to idols, to participate in the religious table culture of the empire, and compromise identity in exchange for acceptance. The overcomer is the one who refuses that identity negotiation. What then is the white stone with the new name? It is the answer to an identity under assault. It is not merely a legal document or a social token or a discharge certificate, though it may contain elements of all three. It is something more personal, more intimate, more permanent than any of these. It is the overcomer's true identity, crystallized, inscribed, held in God's hand, indestructible. In a city where the pressure was to let Rome name you, to let the imperial system assign your identity through participation in its rituals, Christ says, "I have already named you, and the name I have given you is written on a stone you will carry, that no emperor, no culture, no pressure, no shame can reach." And then the most arresting detail of all, known only to the one who receives it, not known to the angels, not recorded in any registry that other beings can access. The name exists in the exclusive, impenetrable space between God and the one he has kept. The overcomer's identity before God is not publicly catalogued. It is privately held, a secret only 2 parties will ever share. What kind of God does this? What does it mean for the creator of the universe to carve out a dimension of relationship with an individual believer that even the rest of creation cannot enter? Let that truth sink in. We now know what the promise contains. But we have not yet asked the most important question. Why is this promise given specifically to the one who endures in the last days? And what does the escalating pressure of the present age reveal about how close the overcomer is to receiving what has been stored? There is a pattern in Scripture that runs so consistently across both testaments that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The pressure intensifies before the breakthrough. The opposition concentrates before the deliverance. The wilderness stretches longest in the days immediately preceding the promised land. Joseph's ascent to the second throne of Egypt was preceded by 2 additional years of imprisonment after the cupbearer forgot him. David's anointing as king was followed by a decade of running for his life from the man he was appointed to replace. Elijah's greatest prophetic victory over the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel was immediately followed by such a severe spiritual attack that he collapsed under a tree in the desert and asked to die. The pattern is not random. The pattern is diagnostic. When the pressure is greatest, it is often because the enemy is most aware of what is approaching. Revelation 12:12 carries this logic explicitly. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. The Greek word for knows here is oidon, a word carrying the sense of deep, calculating awareness. The adversary is not operating in a panic. He is operating with precise strategic intelligence, and his intelligence has told him that time is running out. Consider what this means for the believer who is being squeezed. The escalating pressure you feel to compromise, to bend your convictions on identity, to silence your witness, to accommodate the table the world has set, is not evidence that God has lost ground. It is evidence that the adversary has read the calendar differently than we have. The intensity of the assault is a function of urgency, and the urgency belongs to the one who is losing. The church at Pergamum understood this dynamic from inside it. They were not facing vague cultural friction. They were living in the city where the first imperial cult temple in the Roman world had been built, where Augustus was worshipped with the same devotion as the Olympian gods. They were navigating a social architecture in which their refusal to participate carried daily, tangible, economic, and sometimes lethal consequences. Antipas had already been killed. Others were being seduced inward through the Balaam strategy, not through open persecution, but through the slow gravitational pull of accommodation. And the ones who were enduring, who had looked at the table the empire set and said no, were hungry, not metaphorically. The hunger was real in Pergamum. If you refused to participate in the guild festivals, you risked your livelihood. If you declined the social meals where food sacrificed to idols was served, you excluded yourself from the network of relationships on which economic survival depended. The overcomer was, in the most tangible sense, trading one table for the promise of another. This is why the hidden manna is not a generic eschatological reward distributed evenly across all believers at the end of time. It is a reward calibrated to a specific posture, the posture of the one who refused to eat what was not worthy. The overcomer is defined by a specific act of renunciation, and the manna is the specific answer to that specific hunger. The pieces begin to align when we understand what John is doing in the literary architecture of Revelation 2:17. Christ is building a contrast between two meals: the meal of Balaam, the contaminated table of compromise, the food sacrificed to what is not God, and the hidden manna, the pure sustenance preserved by God in a vessel no corruption can reach. The overcomer chose correctly which table to leave hungry from. And Christ's promise is that the hunger they carried from that refusal will be answered in a proportion that makes the temporary scarcity of the wilderness entirely inconsequential. The spiritual dimension of this exchange cannot be reduced to a future transaction, a kind of cosmic loyalty point system where endurance is traded for reward. What is unfolding here is something more organic. The person who refuses the world's table is developing a hunger that only one thing can satisfy, and the hidden manna is that one thing. The refusal and the reward are not merely sequential, they are linked at a deeper level. The overcomer's hunger is itself a preparation for what is being stored. Ancient scholars noticed a pattern that the rabbis preserved across generations of commentary. The manna given in the wilderness was sustaining, but it was not the final provision. It was always pointing forward. It was a preview, a type, a temporal shadow of something the wilderness generation was never intended to fully grasp. What was sealed in the golden jar was not merely excess manna. It was a prophetic sign of a heavenly sustenance that the messianic age would finally and fully disclose. There is something about the hidden manna that most teachers of this passage have never fully traced. Something embedded in the original account in Exodus 16 that transforms the entire meaning of what Christ is promising to the overcomer. And it begins with a question no one thinks to ask. Why was the manna in the golden jar never meant to be eaten at all? Here is the question that unlocks everything. In the wilderness, 2 million Israelites ate manna every morning for 40 years. They gathered it at dawn. They ground it, boiled it, baked it, consumed it. And every portion that was kept beyond the day it was given rotted, crawled with worms, became inedible. The manna was designed to be consumed. It could not survive its own day. It was provision for the journey, extraordinary, miraculous provision, but provision tied entirely to the present moment. There was one exception: the single omer placed in the golden jar inside the ark. That manna never rotted, never decayed. The writer of Hebrews references it in the 1st century as still existing in the ark, intact. Which means that in the entire history of Israel's wilderness journey, across 40 years and 10,000 mornings of manna on the ground, there was exactly one portion that was never eaten by anyone. One portion that passed through every hand in the Israelite camp untasted. One portion that no mouth in the history of the covenant people ever consumed. And the question you have to sit with is this: why? It was not stored as a scientific sample. It was not preserved as a museum artifact. The text gives the reason explicitly. It was kept as a testimony, as a witness for future generations. But testimony to what? Testimony to the fact that God once rained bread from heaven in a desert? That is certainly true, but it barely accounts for the extraordinary preservation of the substance across centuries when every other portion of the same substance could not survive a single night. Hidden beneath the surface of this text is something far more significant. The manna in the ark was never eaten because it was never meant to be eaten. Not by that generation, not by any generation of the natural wilderness era. The manna stored in the golden jar was a prophetic deposit, a physical preserved testimony pointing forward to a sustenance that no wilderness generation was prepared to fully receive. It was kept for the end. It was kept for the overcomer. Now follow the typological thread all the way to its source. In John chapter 6, Jesus is standing before a crowd in Capernaum, the day after he fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. The crowd has followed him across the Sea of Galilee looking for more bread. And Jesus draws the line from Moses to himself with deliberate precision. I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. They say, "Sir, give us this bread always." And he answers, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." The original language reveals something startling here. The Greek construction, ego eimi ho artos tezois, I am the bread of life, is not merely a metaphor. It is a typological disclosure. Jesus is standing in the position that the manna occupied in the wilderness narrative and saying, "I am what the manna pointed to. I am the true bread. I am the heavenly sustenance that the wilderness generation ate in shadow form, and your ancestors received in a sealed jar for 40 years without yet understanding what it meant." The hidden manna of Revelation 2:17 is not merely a symbolic promise. It is Christ himself, given in full, unmediated, unveiled communion to the overcomer who endured to the end. What the wilderness generation ate in a daily, measured, temporary form, what the golden jar held preserved across centuries of human history, what the eschatological hope of the Jewish tradition anticipated as the provision of the Messianic age, is the living bread. And the overcomer will eat it, not in shadow, not in type, not in the daily, calibrated, enough-for-one-day portion of the wilderness, in fullness. The complete, eternal, unmediated nourishment of Christ himself. Let that truth sink in. The world offered Pergamum's believers a table. The table was real. The food was real. The social belonging it provided was real. And refusing it cost something real. But what was on that table was food that could not satisfy beyond the hour, sustenance tied to the present moment, bound to decay, belonging entirely to a world that is itself passing. The overcomer who walked away from that table hungry is being offered in exchange the bread that the whole wilderness was designed to point toward, the only bread in human history that was preserved across millennia untasted, because it was waiting for the specific recipient God had in mind. And the white stone with the new name, this too falls into place when we see it through this lens. The overcomer in Pergamum had lived under a system that was working relentlessly to rename them. Every act of imperial cult participation was, at its root, an identity statement. I am first a citizen of Rome. I am first a worshipper of Augustus. The city's entire social architecture was a continuous act of naming, assigning identities, requiring participation, demanding that the believer's deepest loyalty be publicly legible to the imperial system. The white stone is Christ's answer to that system. And the answer is not a public counter-declaration. It is something more intimate and more permanent than any public declaration could be. It is a private naming, a name that exists only between God and the one he has kept. The overcomer who refused to let Rome name them walks away from history with a name that no empire, no system, no accuser, no shame, no circumstance, no passage of time can ever reach. Ancient commentators like Victorinus of Petau and Andrew of Caesarea read the white stone as directly connected to the priestly tradition. The stones of the breastplate, each name carried before God in the holiest space. The image that emerges is extraordinary. The overcomer's identity is not merely declared, it is carried, inscribed on a stone, held in the hand of the great high priest, presented before the Father in the eternal sanctuary. Your name before God is not a record in a registry that might be accessed or contested. It is a stone held in a priestly hand, engraved with a specificity that belongs to no one else, carried into the presence of God on your behalf. And only you will ever know what it says. Pause and consider what this means for the person who has endured. Every day you chose faithfulness over comfort. You were being prepared for an intimacy with God that the person who never resisted anything cannot fully receive. Every time you walked away from the world's table hungry, you were deepening the capacity for what has been stored. Every moment the pressure on your identity pushed you toward compromise, and you held. You were being named in the hidden place by the only one whose naming lasts. The hidden manna is not a consolation prize for people who had a hard time. It is the inheritance of those who understood, at some level deeper than words, that the bread the present age offers is not bread at all. And the white stone with the new name is not a reward invented after the fact for loyalty that was eventually noticed. It is the eternal disclosure of an identity that has been carried before God since before your endurance began. What was stored for you was not stored in response to your faithfulness. It was stored in anticipation of it. Sit with this mystery for a moment. The golden jar in the ark did not wait, because God was unsure whether any overcomer would appear. It waited because God already knew the name of the one it was for. The hidden manna was hidden not merely from the wilderness generation, but for the overcomer, specifically, personally, with the kind of forethought that belongs only to one who exists outside of time, and yet is present in every moment of yours. If you have been enduring, if the hunger has been real and the cost of faithfulness has been real, and some mornings the promise of what God has stored has felt very far away, then this verse was written for you. Not for a general audience, for you. The world will keep setting its table. The pressure to eat what is not worthy will not lighten in the days ahead. If anything, the pattern of Scripture suggests it will intensify as the consummation approaches. But you now know what is being kept. You know what the golden jar holds. You know the name on the white stone is already engraved, already carried, already presented before God in the heavenly sanctuary. Endure. Not because the reward is worth calculating, but because you have tasted enough of the true bread to know that nothing else can satisfy, and what has been stored for the one who holds on is more than you have yet imagined. If this message has reached something real in you today, leave a comment below. Share what part of this promise you needed to hear. Give this video a like, subscribe to God Revealed, and share it with someone who is enduring. Because this is not content. This is a weapon, and if you have never placed your faith in Jesus Christ, the true hidden manna, the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world, this is your moment. He is not asking you to be perfect before you come. He is asking you to come. Right now, wherever you are, you can say these words and mean them from the deepest place you have. I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. If you said that, find a Bible-believing church, begin to read the Gospel of John, and know this: your name is already being carried on a stone in a hand that will never let go.